Well, today we dive into a topic that isn't talked about nearly enough: career grief. Now, losing a job or facing a setback or transitioning out of a long held career, well, that can feel like, well, losing a part of yourself. The emotions, the disappointments, the uncertainty, and even the grief, they're real and valid. And this is especially relevant as many positions are being downsized in both private and government agencies. But here's the good news: setbacks don't define you, they refine you. And so today we will explore how to navigate the emotional toll of career loss, rebuild confidence, and turn those setbacks into comebacks with our guest, Laverne McKinnon. And if you've ever felt stuck, if you've ever felt unsure of what's next, or even just like you've lost a piece of your identity, well, you might find some answers in our conversation today. So stay tuned. This podcast is brought to you by DJ Works Media and HalftimeSuccess.com, offering resources and insights for those at mid-career or the halftime of life. Explore our diverse categories, including courses, coaching, health, music, software, and travel. We're here to help you make this stage of life your best ever. So get our new articles, downloads, and podcasts by signing up for weekly updates at goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter. Now, let's dive into today's episode. Well, hello, everyone. I'm so happy to have Laverne here. Laverne, thank you for being with us today. I'm so excited for our conversation.
Me too. I've been looking forward to it all week.
Yay. And you have quite, the background, a little bit of that background similar to what I do with the arts. But you really talk about career grief. And I'm real interested in you sharing a little bit more of your background instead of me giving these long introductions, but everybody's bio, because I think I've been on the other end having to wait in the wings. It's like, okay, get it over with. So why don't you share a little bit of your background and why you're talking about what you're talking about?
It's all interrelated. So thank you for that tee up. So I'm an executive and a leadership coach, and I'm also a grief recovery specialist. And the reason why I'm a grief recovery specialist is because as I've been working with clients through their career transitions, what I discovered is that my clients were feeling stuck because many of them were experiencing what I call career grief. They didn't realize that they had experienced a setback in their careers that warranted a mourning process. And I know this firsthand because that was my experience. I come out of entertainment and I had an amazing experience. I worked at CBS for 10 years and an incredible rise through the ranks. I was promoted every 18 to 24 months. I started in the children's department, and then I eventually became the head of drama development at CBS when we were doing all of those procedurals like CSI, Without a Trace, NCIS. And then after 10 years, I was fired. And I did not see it coming, and it was devastating. And it took me, Deborah, I'm not even joking here, over 10 years to realize that the reason I was struggling so much emotionally was that I'd had my heart broken and I was grieving, but I didn't know it. And so I've really made it my life's work to help people understand that there is such a thing as career grief and that you have permission to grieve a career setback.
Wow. That's a very powerful story too. And I love people that talk about, because I talk with a lot of different coaches and everybody has this little different, emphasis. And this was a little bit different with the career grief. I thought, well, that's an interesting twist on, coaching. But with your background, you realized in yourself that you needed that help. And I think some of what we talk about when it comes out of our own experience, it's really real. and it's helping people when they are very raw. So that's a great reason that you're in it. That's what I wondered. Okay, so how did that all happen from the place that you were at in entertainment? And yeah, and being in entertainment and being in the that sort of atmosphere, it is just, I mean, it's a lot of pressure and it's very fast. There's a lot going on all the time. And all of a sudden, when that's gone, it's like, what do I do now? Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. And not to say that this doesn't occur in other industries, but specific to entertainment, there's an attachment to the work that I don't see quite as much in other places, but you use the word raw, and I think that that's such a perfect word to describe a grief experience as it relates to career. And it's like a lot of what I had experienced and what I see in other people is that there's it's not just a sadness, it's a deep, deep loss that occurs. And so sometimes people ask me, like, what's the distinction between, being sad and grieving? And sadness is an emotion that we experience, like, oh, I dropped my ice cream cone. I'm sad, something like that, where grief is really specific to attachment. And I think in Western society, we're very attached to our identities vis-a-vis our jobs and our careers. So when there's a setback, it strikes us in a way that makes us feel raw and exposed and incredibly tender.
Yeah, that's interesting that you said attachment to your career, and because it's I've been a lifetime entrepreneur pretty much too, but I've been on my own. I've not worked for a company like CBS. I've not, even though I've done so much in entertainment, I've booked my own shows. I've done, if I don't work, it's because I'm not, actively engaging and showcasing and on the phone and all of that. So, but it's a little bit different there. All of a sudden with the transitions, you miss certain parts of that because of the pace of it, the excitement of it, the development of it, especially in the arts. Yeah, that would be very, very relevant and very true. But people are experiencing that too in maybe jobs they've had for many years right now, because there's a lot of layoffs, both in the private and in the government section right now that are, kind of a reshuffling. A lot of companies want people now back in the office and, all of that they had all this freedom and being at home. We have an attorney son he's been able to work remotely, loves it. He gets a lot more done that way. But, and he says, boy, if I have to go back in the office full time, he said, I might, who knows? I'm not going to give away what he'd end up doing here, but on a podcast. But I mean, they might consider, doing something else or going to another company or whatever. But if that decision is just made for you, that's different. Just to say, okay, yeah, you're gone, or we've cut your position, or, we don't need you anymore. We want you to move across the country. All of those things have happened for years, but right now, especially, there's a lot of reshuffling. It feels like that because it just, we've come out of these years of, working differently. And now, how are we going to adjust at this point? So, that was, great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go ahead. You had a comment on that.
Yeah. You bring up a really, really good point, is that, for so many people, when we had lockdown, there wasn't a collective understanding that the way of life that we were attached to, that we felt a sense of safety and security because there was a structure to it, a predictability to it. And so there was grief to have lost that type of structure. But we weren't able to name it because we were in the midst of COVID and we were thinking about so many other things. And now we've acclimated to a great degree to working hybrid, working remote. And now a lot of companies are saying, okay, but now I want you back in your office. And it's like, wait a second, I've just adapted. And now I feel the sense of safety and security and comfort with the way that I've adapted. Now I have to adapt again. And so these are all real sources of grief. Now, someone else may say, what's the big deal? It's, you work from home, you go into the office, it doesn't really matter. And I want to put a little bit of a spotlight on this, which is it's about the attachment. It's not so much the event or the thing, but it's the depth of attachment that you feel towards your job, your identity, where you work, the people that you work with, that links to whether it's sadness or no sadness, or whether it's grief and really we're in some mourning process.
Yeah. Interesting. Because when you say the attachment, that makes a little bit more sense, to me. When we do those personality tests, I'm usually kind of low on the empathy area. So it's, I think I always blame it on having 3 sons and just saying, well, get over it. Come on, let's get with it, but really understanding that people respond in different ways. There were those that did start working remotely that absolutely loved it, but others that were lost because they really needed that box. They needed to be there with people. They needed that interaction. And now it's like, thrilling for them if they would go back. But the others, it's hard. So I think everyone responds a little bit different, and an understanding that with, how much attachment, not only to the job, but to the life, kind of the whole schedule, all of that. And if you're all of a sudden, you've been a lot of people go through this at mid-career halftime too. These are the people I talk with that are making those changes, that want to go out on their own. They want to do something else, but it feels like the bottom drops out if you don't have that structure for you already. You have to create that structure for yourself. And that's part of this grieving process, what I would think, as we get into all of a sudden, how do you deal with all of this? How do you deal with some of those changes and those mindsets? So how do you really know? You've defined it a little bit more. So if you have somebody come to you and say, this happened to me, and how do you really know that they're going through that career grieving process, or if they're just sad because of some sort of loss and they're ready to move on? How do you really identify that as a coach?
Yes. Yeah, there's usually when people are coming to me, it's because they've been struggling for a while. And then I'm going to go back to the example of I dropped my ice cream cone and I'm sad, bummed about that. And that might stay with me for 20 minutes. It could potentially even stay with me all day.
Right.
Grief is so much more complex. And some of the symptoms of grief that I certainly experience, and I've seen others experience when it comes to, a career setback, are insomnia, depression, loss of appetite, eating too much, lethargy. These are all like physical manifestations that indicate there might be something more here. And to take it one step further is that when people are feeling that level of emotion, oftentimes we judge it and we judge the event. And so it's like, there must be something wrong with me. I can't get over this.
Yeah.
And also our society, because we don't really recognize career grief, there is an expectation of like, I'm sorry that the show that you were rehearsing for 3 months, that nobody came. Well, what are you going to be doing next, Deborah? And it's like, wait a second. It's like, maybe like you poured yourself into this thing and you have this depth of attachment to it because it has a very special meaning for you.
Right.
But there's a societal expectation that you're just supposed to be able to move forward. Yeah. And so that starts to create messaging around, there is something wrong with me because I'm not bouncing back. I'm not finding the same level of passion. I don't have the same kind of motivation that I did before. And so, I just need to work harder. I need to grit down and just, keep going at it. But that winds up unprocessed failure, unprocessed loss. It actually impacts our resiliency. And that loss of resiliency, then it depletes our sense, our ability to move forward. So it becomes a bit of a cycle.
I really, immediately that popped in my head is some of those steps can really apply to those that are just facing failure. I mean, it's the same sort of thing as, when a show, you're promoting a show and you're maybe, booking it and this whole thing if you're in the entertainment area. And then all of a sudden, like you have 2 people show up. Now, this has happened to me in club work before. I've had this like midnight spot, which was, I should have never taken that anyway at a club, but because that was not when my audience was going to show up. But, you have 2 people show up and you could feel like a total failure. It's like, should I ever do this again? Should I just drop out? Should I just quit? But you're going through a lot of those stages of, the wondering and the laying awake at night and all of those sort of things too. So I think it can apply not only to somebody that is in a job situation employed by someone, but even a self-employed person. And I think that that can definitely apply. So that was really good that you brought that up on those responses, because that could definitely relate to failure on any level there. So when you're talking about a career setback, and you're talking about the mourning sort of area and how do you mourn and recoup, what if people just don't take you seriously? Are you supposed to just kind of move on, or how can you explain what you're going through and maybe even self-medicate a little bit and not really depend on others to validate your feelings? What is your response to that?
It's a legitimate question and concern because it's not part of the vernacular of Western society. And so there is, the hard truth is that there is a lot of judgment. And so, where there is an expectation of like, okay, just pick yourself back up again. And so what I love to coach clients around is that it is to be able to selectively choose the confidants, to be able to share. I've had this thing happen to me. My TV show was canceled, or I worked, 3 years on a script and no one bought it. I couldn't even get someone to read it. Or I booked this thing at midnight and 2 people showed up. And so to be able to go to someone that loves you and to be able to be vulnerable and say, I know this might sound foreign to you, but I'm grieving and I feel really, really sad about this experience. And I'd like to be able to share this with you. Now, again, the hard truth is not everyone is going to receive that, because most people can't tolerate another person feeling sad.
Yeah.
And so they want to take your sadness away from you. And so part of what I coach clients around is to be able to say, is to advocate for oneself. And so, for example, I might say to you, Deborah, I want to share some information with you. And I'd love it if you could just listen. And I know you're probably going to want to give me some advice and tell me everything's going to be okay. But what I really need right now is just to be able to share my experience with you and just to have you listen. And so to be able to set the container for what you need. Now, I have another client who said, okay, may I ask for a hug? I was like,
by all means,
yeah. You can ask for a hug. But I do want to acknowledge that there are 2 types of grievers, whether it's career grief or bereavement. There's something called like head grievers and heart grievers. So what I was just explaining to you, that falls into the category of heart grievers. Heart grievers like to share feelings, like to journal, like to be in company with other people and find that like that intimacy and connection. Now, there are other people who are head grievers, which means they don't necessarily want to talk about it. And that's actually okay, because that's not actually a golden rule. You don't have to talk about your grief. You don't have to spill your feelings, but you may take action. you may do something in order to regain a sense of control, because one of the things that grief does to us is it takes that feeling of control away from us. So it may be like, okay, I'm going to go book an afternoon of just playing, for friends so that I can feel like the love, as opposed to constantly remembering those two people that showed up at midnight.
Yes.
And so, I mean, I know we'll go a little bit further into some rituals around grief, but I think that's some of the languaging that can be used.
That's great, because, that's not something I would probably do, is to tell somebody I'm mourning over, or I'm grieving over this. I would say, I was just disappointed. So my language would be a little bit different, but it's okay. Use the language, I guess, that you're comfortable with. But I liked what you said about, can you just hear me out a little bit? I just need to talk. I just need to share this to get something off. I don't need advice. I just need a listening ear. And, that's actually a lot, probably why my husband and I are still together after a number of years, because we're able to talk with each other. He's one of my best sounding boards, and he doesn't always, the advice he gives is usually wise. And that's why I would share something with him. But it's otherwise he gets kind of upset, because I would be upset a little bit, so you don't want to do that because you have a spouse like that, we do that. But it's nice to have somebody in your life that you can talk with about that. And that's really an important part, because we work by ourselves so much. If we're coaches, or I'm an entrepreneur, and I have other people I work with, of course, some assistants and things, but it's not like I'm seeing them all the time. It's, you have to have those people that you're talking with, and you can bounce those things off with. And if you have something very traumatic like this, of a job, a career loss, complete career loss, that's difficult. If you're let go after 30 years, some of the people are, 20 years, say, okay, can you take an early retirement? You go, I'm not ready yet. What am I going to do? What am I, with the rest of my time, or I need to still work? Those are big, big questions. So,
they are indeed. And I want to also just clarify too, that for some people, they may choose to leave a job, to retire. And it doesn't mean that they don't have permission to grieve, even if it was their choice.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes.
So that's, because then, even if they've made that decision to leave, there's a hole. Yeah, that's interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. And maybe like a way to think about this is, people are familiar with divorce, and there may be the choice to say, okay, I'm going to leave my partner. They still have sadness. And if they were, still attached to their partner, but the circumstances just no longer made sense for them to be together, they still have grief.
And that can happen, with the passing of, a spouse or somebody that you're close with too. We'll talk about, how those stages of grief may be very, very similar to that of your regular stages of grief. But how long does this sort of grieving, is there any time frame on this sort of grieving with career grief? Is it similar to maybe losing a loved one, or to grieving in other areas? What has been your experience?
I so appreciate this question, because there's, and again, I think this is so specific to Western societies, that we always want a beginning, middle, and end, because it makes us feel safe. It's like, okay, just tell me I have to run a marathon. Okay, I know it's 26 miles. I'm not going to like it, but at least I know that there's an ending to it. And with grief, there is no time frame. It's like some people could have a mourning process that lasts a couple months, or a couple days, or a couple of years. And like for me, I mean, over 10 years, because I didn't actually understand that I was grieving. And so I didn't have a structure to process the feelings and the things that were happening to me. But I can say that when someone actively engages with the mourning process, that there is a return to wholeness in a way that people who don't engage in a mourning process don't experience that. And
Wow.
there's Mary Frances O'Connor, who wrote a wonderful book called The Grieving Brain, gives a great analogy, which is that grief is sort of like a broken bone. So if you don't set that bone properly, it'll heal somewhat, and you might, have range of motion, but it's not going to be 100%, and there may be some pain associated with it. If you set that bone properly, you go through a mourning process, then you're going to, probably regain like full motion. However, if you x-ray that bone, you will always see that it was broken.
Okay.
Grief will always be with you, but through a mourning process, you can heal, you can return to wholeness. And the other hard truth with grief, and I'm sure people have experienced this, your listeners have experienced this, is that we do have grief spikes. And so you may feel like, okay, I've gone through my mourning process, but then you drive past that club that you booked the midnight show, and then you have a little spike of grief because you're reminded of that ouch. And that's absolutely normal. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just part of the human experience.
It really is. I mean, that's why we're different than AI. We have feelings.
Yes.
We have, there's no replacing on that. They can try. I was just speaking with someone last night, and I hadn't realized how long the process really, her husband had ended up getting dementia kind of early. And, so she lost him, of course. He ended up passing. And I talked with her last night, and I said, how long has it been now? I was thinking, 2 years, 1 year, 2. She said, it's been like 3 years, almost 3 years. And it's still hard for her, but she has taken the initiative, to get together. That's why I was inviting her to things, and we do different outings together. We'll do a bike ride or do, just to connect with those people, because, that process, life goes on, and that's not going to go away. Like you said, it's still going to be there. It's still going to be there, but life moves on. And the beauty about it is that we don't, we can deal with it, but it's not going to, it doesn't have to totally shut us down. If I know either, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just to caboose off of what you were saying, that there are tools, there are resources to be able to support one, so that, and to be completely frank, it's like I shut down. Like, I was high functioning on the outside, but on the inside, I was a mess. I just really floundering because I did not know that there were, tools, resources, rituals that were available to me.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting, because, I kind of hold a lot of stuff inside too. It's, I'm not one to, just emulate, what the feelings are. So let's talk about some of those feelings, because that, with the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages, with denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, all of those normal stages of grief. It could be a death of a spouse. It could be a death of a very close person to us. We've all had that happen. All of us have, losing a parent, but how is this similar? And are you building off of some of these sort of stages to help people through their own grieving process with career grief?
The interesting thing about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's work is that it was very specific to patients that she was working with who were like end stage. They were in the process of dying. And so this was something that she had observed, but the stages are not actually linear. And so you don't actually move from denial to anger to then bargaining and then depression and then finally acceptance, that we actually move in and out, go back, return, move forward, and you can be in acceptance. And then there's a grief spike, and then we feel the sense of anger or depression again. And what Elizabeth Kubler-Ross was so seminal was because it identified and gave a language to the emotions of grief that people were not like they weren't as tangible. And a great one of her colleagues, a man by the name of David Kessler, wrote a book about the sixth stage of grief, which I think is especially relevant to career grief, which is the meaning that we make of the loss. So going back to the earlier part of our conversation, it's like, oh, I've been fired. I'm a loser. I'm a failure. And so loss in many, many forms we're as humans, we're meaning making machines. And so we create meanings to these events. And when we're looking at it from a career perspective, if I'm out looking for a job, but I'm in my head saying, I'm a loser, I'm a screw up, I'm a failure, that's going to severely impact my ability to be able to move forward and get back on my feet again.
Right.
And so it's really, really imperative to interrogate the meanings that we create of the loss. At the same time, it's important to identify like what really is the loss. So, for example, with me, it's like, oh, I lost my job. I lost my title. I lost my position of power. I lost my benefits. I lost my parking spot. I lost my sense of community.
Right.
But then underneath that, what I really lost, because I was blindsided, I did not see it coming. I lost my sense of trust. I lost my sense of like a faith in the system. I lost my belief that if I work hard enough, I will be successful.
Wow.
And so this like whole infrastructure started to fall apart. And then underneath that, I lost my confidence. I lost my esteem. And then at the very core of it is a loss of identity.
Wow.
And once we lose our identity, it's like, whoa, we're just in free fall.
Right, right. Wow. Well, that was really expounding on that with, your sense of belonging and as well as your own identity. I mean, that was a big summation of a lot of that. So, well, how do you tell others that if you're going to share that you're grieving, you're not going to just walk up to your boss or your coworker and go, I'm just really grieving. I mean, you're going to go, really? How are you going to communicate that? And how will that make you look? Was it going to discount your worth in their eyes? And are there other words that maybe you should use? If your position is different now. So all of a sudden you went from your position, you got your own parking spot, you went all of that. Now all of a sudden they said, well, can you go back to working in children's again, like where you started, which could be really fun, but all of it, you felt like, well, I was there 10 years ago. So how do you communicate some of this that you're really grieving or you're feeling that loss with those around you?
Yeah. And I always use this vernacular of a hard truth. And the hard truth is you may be working in a company culture or an industry culture where it's actually not accepted or understood. However, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't advocate for yourself. And you may not use the language of I'm grieving, I'm sad, I need some time. I mean, fortunately, I feel like there is a growing awareness about people's emotional health, their mental health. And so it's still important to be able to advocate, to be able to say, whether it's time off or being able to leave work early because you want to go into a group or a therapy session. And so the hard truth is that there isn't a singular approach to being able to communicate this. It really depends on the culture. But at the same time, I want to really emphasize that you have permission to grieve. And depending on the style of griever you are, if you're a head griever or a heart griever, there are different ways to advocate for that. So it might mean, for example, if you're a head griever, you could go to a boss and say, okay, that project tanked. I'm ready for another one. I'm ready to dive back in.
Great advice. And that kind of leads us to the next thing, because when we are in different positions. And this can, again, it can directly apply to entrepreneurs because we can take time off, a little break to kind of that mental time off to kind of just regroup, go out and take a walk out to where you get perspective again. Those are the things that we all need to do. And I'm very, very much pro doing that. And I talk about that quite a bit. But how can we prepare ourselves? Because we know this is part of life. There are going to be setbacks. There just are. This is, you don't go through your whole life and get every single promotion and get every single job that you've wanted to work there forever. I mean, some of our parents may have worked at their job for 30 years, but that's very rare these days. And there are different, changes happening all the time. I talk a lot about mindset. How do we prepare our minds, and you've transitioned now to the work that you are in because now you can help others. And that is, I can't imagine how fulfilling that is for you with some of the contacts that you have directly in the entertainment business, because I'm sure that's where some of your clients come from because you were very networked in that area, in your specific area. So it's very rewarding and it's healing in that respect. But how can we prepare ourselves? Because we know those setbacks are going to come, and how what mindsets do we adapt?
Well, first off, you're doing it, which
Mm-hmm.
is so awesome because you've just normalized that setbacks they happen. And just
Yes.
because you've experienced a setback, it
Yes.
doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with you.
Right.
It's a normal part of life.
Right.
And yet our society puts a lot of pressure on
Mhm.
people to be perfect.
Yeah.
And, specific to the creative industries, I got to go down my soapbox for a moment here, which is like creativity. The best creative comes from taking risks.
Totally.
And with risks comes failures. They go
All the time.
hand.
Yes.
And we live in a capitalist society. And
Mhm.
so it's like when there's failure, it's like,
Mhm.
oh, then I don't think I'm going to hire Laverne again because she just had that big failure. But it's like, no, I took a creative risk.
Yes.
And so part of what I also want to like caboose onto what you said in terms of like setbacks are normal, which is also like wanting to normalize the processing of failure and to be able to say, and without judgment of like, okay, this is what worked and this is what didn't work. So then we can course correct. So
Yes.
having that mental frame of mind of it's normal and now I'm going to assess what happened as opposed to judge it. I'm going to identify like what are the actual losses. So for example, a project tanks. Okay, let's assess that. And we can say, okay, we didn't have enough like financial resources. Oh, the team wasn't gelling properly. So then in order to move forward, we can say, okay, if like we lost a team member, then we need to replace that team member. If there was a loss of trust, how do we rebuild trust? If there is a loss of confidence, then we have to rebuild confidence. So it's really important to be able to identify that loss. So putting that mind frame on is I think really important to know that there is a way to move forward when setbacks naturally occur. And then of course interrogating the meaning that we're creating from the loss, because that can be wow, that can just be that can just suck all of the energy out if we're having that negative self-talk just
Of course.
at our heels.
Oh, of course it can. And when you reframe that mindset, that failure is a learning process. That's how we learn. That is exactly how we learn. But people aren't, if you've got this little box and you just show up every day, I mean, that's all you do. And, you'll have a little bit of that happening. But usually if you do your job, you're fine. You get paid, you're fine. You keep going. But especially if you are in any creative field, failure is a part of the process. But it's not always a complete failure. There's always I've learned a lot through the years. I've done so many projects. And I love it. And I'll never quit, until my boys put me in a home. But I'll just keep working because I feel it's such an important messaging. And it's so important to keep reaching out to other people. And it keeps me alive. It keeps me excited, and it keeps growing too. But if you don't learn from those failures, take a step back, say, okay, I'm grieving. This is just really, really hard right now. But what can I learn from this? And how can I move forward and not stay in that place and still admit that it's going to happen and it's going to creep up and I'm going to feel embarrassed. I'm going to feel all of these feelings that sometimes, when others are looking at you and you feel like, oh, they're judging me or whatever. You just have to get beyond some of that. It's hard, but learn. As we learn, boy, there's nothing more thrilling with that of just as we learn to say, I'm in a different place and I'm, you can see that growth. That's why journaling, I think, is so important. But as you said, there's two different types of grievers, the head and the heart. But even for a head griever, taking time to just write a couple lines is very, very therapeutic. Or at least talking it out.
Yeah. And there's one of my favorite tools is to be able to take failures, mistakes, face plans, and convert them into best practices.
Wow.
So whether you're a heart griever or a head griever, but it really speaks to a lot of head grievers to be able to say, oh, this is the action that I can take as a result of this thing that had happened. And so to your point, it's converting like in a really tangible and visceral way. What I've learned has now become a best practice. Yeah.
Wonderful. I think that's well, what one thing would you like to leave our audience with today? That was a great one. In best practices. So can you sum things up? If someone's listening to this, and hopefully they will look at the show notes and they'll look at the links and they'll look at everything that's included. Some of these I also include with articles. So make sure you're getting, our updates, our newsletter updates. But what is one thing that you love people to take away from if they've listened to this complete podcast and they've thought, oh, wow, that was great. What do I do now? Where do I go next? What do I do?
I would say, on the heels of permission to grieve is to create a ritual that will allow to support your mourning process. So for example, a writer that I work with, and this is actually a ritual that I've used many times with writers, is to print out the script, the treatment, the thing that did not make it across the finish line, and bury it, burn it, but say words. And you can even invite, a friend or two to the funeral of the thing that didn't move forward. I'm actually playing with a new ritual for myself because I actually have all of my high heel shoes from my date at CBS. And I was like, I need to do a ritual where I bury my Manolos.
No, give them away.
They're vintage at this point.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. So somebody will go, they buy your house at some point and they're thinking in the back, what are all these shoes doing?
Exactly. What crazy person did that?
These archaeological finds. That's pretty funny. Creating a ritual, a habit. I'm big on habits, and that's all in just tiny little steps. Take a tiny step and take another tiny step and create that sort of habit. That sort of ritual. And remember when my dad became very ill, we lost him very, very quickly, unexpectedly. But, he went through every day of just with this positive attitude. And he told me, it's a ritual. He's just going through the ritual of, trying to get better. He thought he'd live to 100. We all thought he would, but it was that ritual. And I've always remembered, because he loved living, and we don't want to take away that joy of living. And a lot of things can take away our joy. They just can. And so don't let this get you down. If you're listening, and you're in this same spot, give Laverne a call or just contact you, and I'll have you give contact information in a second. But just don't quit, and realize that there's there's healing ahead. And, the true failure is when you totally quit. That is the true failure. And, we've got a lot everyone has a lot to give very, very uniquely. So just kind of say what some of your contact information, how can people reach you, that you can, if they're listening to this.
So two places to find me, primarily on Substack, Laverne McKinnon or Moonshot Mentor on Substack. Mm-hmm. And I post weekly blogs and podcasts. And then there's a paid Substack tier for $5 a month. And you can come join me for co-working sessions and meditation practices. And then starting in April, I'll be doing webinars and live coaching as well, or at my website, lavernmckinnon.com, and there's all my socials and how to work with me there. Deborah, I've so enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for the opportunity to chat about career grief, because it's not something that a lot of people know about.
It was kind of unique. And I get a lot of requests to be on a podcast, interviewed, and, I've got a good number of them now. And I love it, of course. But I feel like that's something, even with my, kind of empathy level that's usually not very high, because I've had to pick myself up so many times, and I think everybody else should do it too. And so I kind of put those expectations. I have to be very careful about that, and be a listener and understand others, because people, they do go through things a lot different. It depends on the background, depends a lot of different things. So, but I really felt like this was, especially for the timing of this topic, because there's been so much change this year. It's been a big political ride. It's been a big ride with these fires. It's been with the employment, different things within the office, out of the office. There's a lot of change. And so I felt like this topic would be very, very relevant to help people move forward, because we don't want you to quit. It's very, very important. You can do something else. You don't have to, there's so many options. I talk about a lot of that. My Hero Mountain Summit, we go through a mentorship, getting you from one place to the other, because people need guided, not only guided, but they need accountability. They quit way too soon. Don't quit. So understand that. And again, I do have a newsletter. All of your stuff will be in. I announce all of our podcasts. So don't miss a single one. goalsforyourlife.com/newsletter. I have a number of websites. So those are all available too, but you get those in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining us today, Laverne. This has been fascinating and very fun. You've just gone through major stuff too with the LA fires. And so it was nice to see your smiley face that you were there. And very, very grateful. Many of us have when we have our homes still, and we just really, but we have to be proactive in a lot of different areas of life. And this is one of them as well. So thanks again for being with us. And for all of you who have listened all the way through, thank you for joining us. And I will look forward to being with you again next time. Thank you for joining us. It is because of our wonderful listeners like you that we keep going strong week after week. We'd love it if you'd share and follow us to not miss a single show, and even write a review. You can also find all of our articles, products, and links at womenathalftime.com.